Welcome to episode 5 of Through the Pages. This month had some great books in it, and actually started off with a book that was pretty new. This one came out in May, and it was Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. And what a wonderful book. So I think like a lot of people, mushrooms are just becoming a very fascinating part of nature. And I think whether it's from the culinary sense or the psychedelic sense or the supplement sense, it's just such a wild kingdom. And so there already are a lot of books about, let's say, like the psychedelic side of it, or like how to grow mushrooms or things like that. This really felt like a new book to add to the mycologist's library. And so he is British. He grew up with some parents who were kind of in the scene, I'll say, and so he was privy to psychedelics, or was comfortable with them at a young age, and knew Paul Stamets growing up. And so he actually kind of touches back with him later, learns with him, he's at his house and stuff. So I do kind of see Merlin Sheldrake as like the young British Paul Stamets, which I gotta think is like the highest compliment possible. But yeah, it's an incredible book. And so it starts off like there's not a lot of like redundant stuff in it. I feel like he assumes you already kind of have a little bit of a base. And so he has a little bit of his own history in there, a little bit of kind of like culturally where mushrooms are at these days. But then really got deep on the science side of it too, which was, I learned a lot from it. And I think anyone could kind of come out and write like a book about mushrooms these days, and mushrooms are popular, so that would be a popular book in some regards. But this really, he wanted to bring new information to the table, and I learned a ton in this book. The part there, he had a lot where he was talking about kind of like the intelligence of mycelium, which mycelium is the network underneath mushrooms. So like in a forest, there'll be a large network of interconnected mycelium there, which is sort of like an internet for mushrooms and how they send information. So like you could have a big swath of them like miles and miles across. A storm can roll in and they can send a message to these ones like, hey, a storm's coming, get ready. And so it's their means of transferring information. And so, it doesn't have a brain. It's not the traditional type of intelligent being we would think of. Like, it doesn't have eyes, so there's that. And but it can figure out molds, like how a slime mold will do, like figure out a maze. So, be one objective place to end, and you can come through and there'll be a little pathway, some dead ends, and usually if you put a live slime thing in it, it'll go kind of check out the pathways and figure its way out, which is something that as humans, we can't do. We can't go through 2 doors at once, but they can figure it out. Oh, this one wasn't right, proceed and put all the effort in this way. So it was interesting to see that they have that intelligence as well. They talked about a study done, I believe it was in Japan, because it was on the Tokyo, like the grid of their system, or their roads and public transit, and the routes that the slime mold found to be the most like productive for cycling through, and this, I think it was mycelium that did it, but ended up being the routes that they used for their like transit in their bus system, I think. And so it was like, in our decades and decades of evolution in transportation in this city, we've gotten to this point. We put that in there with that grid, and it just, this would be the right way to do it, and just knows. And so it was just wild to hear about like that intelligence, or what they're capable of doing, because we're closer to, or mushrooms are closer to us than they are to plants. The big factor there would be that plants take in carbon dioxide and put out oxygen. We do the opposite. Mushrooms take in oxygen, release carbon dioxide like us. And so that, along there's other things, but mushrooms are more intelligent than the average plant, I will say. And it's its own kingdom, but they're the most adaptable, I would think, of anything in terms of like how they actually live in nature. There was a section about Chernobyl, which I'd recently just gotten into off of that HBO miniseries, which I found fascinating because it was very recent history that we don't learn in school, but it was super, super, like, important to know. But yeah, so these mushrooms in Chernobyl learned how to essentially like photosynthesize radiation. So basically, like they can convert radiation into energy for themselves, and now they're thriving. So it really just the whole book spoke to the intelligence of mushrooms, but then really got into, you know, what are they? What makes them up? Not just mycelium, but like hypha and all these different components that almost have their own intelligence within it. It's like how we think about cells, you know, all the little actions and things, like what a mitochondria's purpose is, like how many layers of intelligence is within it. And so it was really interesting to learn in that way. And then, I won't go through a walk through a forest thinking the same. You understand things differently, or where, I don't know, I think about humans as being so dominant on the planet just because of like the innovations that we see in the buildings and the prowess, but it's a shared planet, and I think we don't understand how important mushrooms are for the planet at large, and like what they enable in our body, everything, that they're just like, they're sort of a catalyst in nature. And I think it's something that, we're just going to keep learning more and more and more about them, which is awesome, because what a wonderful thing, mushrooms. But yeah, last note on it, the cover is incredible. Honestly, like, I think I saw Michael Pollan post this, and that, like, once saw the cover and just everything about it rung out to me, and always like finding kind of newer books. So yeah, there's a really neat video with him where he's saying, like, I want to eat my words, and basically like put spores of oyster mushrooms inside one of the copies of his book, and then it kind of grows. And so there's just an image of him like holding this book with oyster mushrooms growing off of it, but then he does follow through in a video and like cuts them, sautés them, and eats them, which is kind of one of the weird things a person super into mushrooms might come up with. Really, really good book. I will say it gets very in the weeds on the science part, and so like halfway through I was like, I'm literally going to give this book out as a gift, like a bunch. Like this is, who wouldn't like this book? And then it kind of got a little deeper. I was like, all right, I'm digging it. But like, I realized some of the microbiology parts that, like, all right, a whole chapter on this, now that little subset of that, another whole chapter on that. It's like, some people might be like, all right, exciting stuff is coming past. Like, so I liked all of it. I don't know that everyone would like all of it, but most of it, I think any human would be like, this is cool. So do check it out. Do check him out. Even if you're just kind of like piqued interest off of that, social media wise, he's doing some good stuff. He's current, he's active. So cool dude. Merlin Sheldrake. Amazing name. Another very cool dude who longtime viewers of the show will recognize has been on here pretty much every episode. James Baldwin, Notes of a Native Son. This is his first like collection of essays. It came out after his first novel. Still just, very young. I felt, I would say, like a little more fire in it, where in some of his writing later in life, it's not that he's worn out by it, but I think he just has accepted how little things may change in his lifetime. And it doesn't seem that he would speak with the fortitude of like, this is the problem, and I think we're the ones to change it. Like, it's mostly just like, white people kill us nonstop. And just like later, it just seems like he was just like, these are the problems. That's what we're going to keep talking about. And so, but in this, he was very, very young, full of angst, and it had a lot of his like personal stories that hadn't been told yet. So it really covered a wide range of years, it felt like, especially into his like adolescence and defining moments like that, funeral stories, and just things that you really kind of get a better sense of James Baldwin, the person, rather than like a story from him. And I had originally picked up, was it Nobody Knows My Name? Which is, I started to read it and I was like, oh, this is basically like part 2 to Notes of a Native Son. So swap that, read this in the right order. But I really liked it. I've never read anything that I didn't like from him, and this came out right before Giovanni's Room, the first book I read from him that I just loved. And I think this sort of I don't know, it touches on all the things you want to hear James Baldwin speak on without kind of being like, this is all about race, or this is all about sexuality, or this is all about being black in Paris or America. And like, he covers a lot of ground in it. If someone had never read James Baldwin before, of the like 5 books of his that I've read, this would probably be the top one that I would give, just because it has such a variance in the subject, but also just, I think because it was written over maybe a longer period of time, it just feels like, I don't know, it felt like it had more range. And yeah, there's going to be another James Baldwin book next month, probably another one. I just love this man. So yeah, I feel like I might get to where I'm saying the same things over and over about him. And so I'm trying to find like more in depth on the book. But yeah, this was, I think it came out in 1954. And yeah, just every word of it's still super, super important. So if you've watched all these and I've not encouraged you enough to read a James Baldwin yet, maybe that will be the one. One book I have a lot more to say on would be this, The End of Policing by Alex Vitale. So he really broke this down as if he knew 2020 was coming. Like, it's broken down into all the things that basically, through defunding the police, what we could take off of their plate. And a lot of it makes sense. Like, he tells stories of a city where the sheriff is literally like, we have trouble with wild dogs. That's just something our city is plagued by. It's now the police problem. Like, police aren't out supposed to be doing wild dogs. Like, and so when you start at that, of like, anyone should understand, like, yeah, let's not have all mental health calls or you know, times when a person needs some help, that's always an armed police officer. You know, it broke it down into, I think, what was it? School, the border, the war on drugs, homelessness, and sex work. And did I say the border? Border gangs, but just basically like that all of these need sort of their own department, not even full department, but like group that handles this, you know. And it's like how people have been talking about when you call 911, that as we progress there would be more options. So it's like, hey, this is very specific to addiction, this is an opiate related thing, like you need a certain type of responder, you don't necessarily need an armed guard, what's going on here, like you need help. And so it's not to bash the police for being unable to help in this way, it's that they weren't meant to. And that now they are getting these calls, and no shit, they're not meant to handle this. Like, it's not surprising that they're not delicate with homeless people or don't understand how to talk to them where they're at. And so you're not getting that type of training. You're getting a certain type of training, and then something else that the book shines light on is the extracurricular training that police do. That there are academies and things, you know, maybe it's someone who was a retired cop or whatever it is, you set up these extra trainings. And it just looks good if you're like, hey, after hours I'm doing these training. But that also means that it doesn't have to be sanctioned. It doesn't have to be like, what is he telling you guys? Like, it was an after hours thing. Okay, well, it wasn't from us. We didn't say anything. We didn't tell you to do certain things like this. It was someone else said it, not us. So that's kind of not a good area for the police of these extracurricular trainings. That's probably something we need to look into. It's just kind of like, it's sort of like the prejudice within getting a job, you know, if it's something where, I forget what I was reading this in, I'm trying to rack my brain as I'm speaking, but something where people would face discrimination through getting a job because someone else had done something like, oh, they backpacked through Europe for 3 weeks. Like, was that part of the job? Was that required? Because if it's unrelated, then that shouldn't give anyone a plus. Same with this extracurricular activity that could be run by who knows who, pushing whatever agenda. That shouldn't necessarily make you better if that's not part of the job. And so I think police are going to be put under a sharper and sharper microscope as the weeks and days go and as they keep killing more people. And this book brought a very level-headed, dare I say, bipartisan? Like, I mean, it's hard to deny. When you look at this and you look at how simple it would be to divvy up a lot of the things that police probably don't want to deal with. So I don't think anyone signed up to be a cop thinking like, yeah, I really want to just, if I see a homeless person, I'm going to make him go away. Like, that's not anyone's goal. Like, someone else handle them. Someone else work with them and figure out what their needs are, not how do I make this problem in our city disappear. Because it's like the old Angela Davis quote, prisons don't disappear problems, they disappear people. And this is something where we need to instill a little more humanity in those who have been marginalized, and police aren't going to accomplish that for us. So this book here really broke it down in a simple way. So each topic, say gangs, it would give a little bit of a history of it, kind of say what has been going on with it, why that hasn't been working, and then it would have a section that was essentially like from the voice of a reformist, of someone saying like, okay, I see your problems, these are the changes we would need to make. And then it would kind of explain like, this is why those proposed changes that every time come up are not working, or they've been implemented and haven't been working. It's defunding, it's getting the police out of this. It's something new. There's a certain point where you can't reform anymore. We just, at my day job, KBL, changed our computer system. It was our like POS system, inventory, everything, how we run the business off of. We have been using that for years and years and years, and it had been right. It was a good fit for a lot of years. We just got to a point where it doesn't matter if we invested more in it or worked with the company to change it more, or we put more efforts into it. That system just, we couldn't go forward with it anymore. And that's what our current policing is. We've hit that cusp of it has to be a radical change. And that's not to say radical left change. I'm saying radical that we need to think outside the box here. There may be a new agency coming in, just like how all of a sudden DEA was a new thing. And we all accepted it, worked fine. Now you have that certain lane, you handle that. Whole other topic on that I could talk on a long time, but this is to say that the police aren't going to be the solution for everything related to police currently. And so when we understand that this new system may be something completely different, it can be very daunting. But books like this that make something like Defund the Police not so radical that it's like, give me a minute to explain. Not just a hashtag or a quick Instagram post or, saying, fuck the police, defund them. Like, let's have a level-headed conversation about this. This is our tax dollars. This is our money that we're talking about how to use it. We're just looking at the pie chart of our dollars and saying, this could shift a little bit, make some from here, go to here. Like, I don't believe that defunding the police means a raise in taxes. I feel like we have put a ton in, and if some of these departments that would come up now aren't needing SWAT gear and ammunition and things that are very expensive, we might be able to get a lot more out of a group like that than we could in the category of, say, like gang relations with police. So I don't see this as a radical book. I truly do not. It is very level-headed. I would give, I have people very close to me who are Republican who I think if I even said defund the police, would just couldn't even begin that conversation. I truly believe this book could get us on a similar page. And I think that's the main thing we need right now, sort of as a country, is common ground and compromise. I want things to be a lot more progressive than they currently are. It's not something that will ever happen in one election cycle. And right now we basically have two polar ends. We need some compromise. We need to not further all right, our side won, and then 4 years later your side wins. This defund the police issue has been incredibly divisive. There are some that say defund the police was floated out by the right to sink the left because it's insane. There are some who, it's gotten a ton of debate, and it doesn't seem like it's been the productive type of debate. It seems like it's been the social nuances and where it came from and what side benefit. Let's literally talk about the people we're trying to help. That should be the start. And I realize that is in itself kind of a lefty thing, but this book, Alex Vitale he's not new to the scene, and this came out in 2017. This wasn't a reaction to current times. So he had this in 1997. He had a book about the quality of life in New York City. He's he's just a very rational person and really understands society. So if you have been seeing the Defund Police and want to learn more about it, or there's someone close to you, you're like, man, I just can't find the right words to explain this to you, let Alex Vitale have the words for you. Incredible book, super easy to read. Honestly, it was like 200 pages, and it's broken down by groups in like the chapters are each sort of like certain things that would need help. And so, you know, the sex work one was probably the one I learned the most in. Everything was, even if you don't agree with it, you'll have a better understanding of these areas that need help. It gets into similar territory as Rise of the Warrior Cop, which I discussed in the last episode, and he even has some references to Radley Balco, but which to me just kind of validates that author, that it's not just like some dude was writing about police, like, and I knew going into it, right, Radley was a pretty good source, but to hear it kind of cross-validated is nice. But he does a little bit on the history of policing, which isn't necessarily biased to my eyes, because if it's just true, like, this is what has been happening, this is, like, it doesn't go into it as hard as Radley Balco did on just, like, all the botched raids, all the stuff where, like, they are just not doing well, but it does talk about the 1033 program, which was the program the Pentagon had where they had this, like, stockpile of weapons, just an insane amount of artillery, that then police forces could, like, say, like, hey, we want that, and just be getting things from it at no cost. And this just allowed an obscene flow of weapons into cities of under 50,000 people, like tanks and grenade launchers, like that type of stuff, where you know that stuff's not low dollar. So when we talk about defunding the police, like, have you thought about defunding education? The pennies, the scraps you could maybe whittle out of there. When we talk about defunding the police, it's big dollars, fast. That's why, along with the consistent murders, this is such a pressing issue. And I'm so thankful this book was out as everything hit. And I wish I would have read it in 2017. I would have been a lot more prepared for 2020. But yeah, great book. I'm really curious to read his other one, even though I realized, like, a book on quality of life in the 1990s in New York City is just incredibly far removed from current times. I just really liked his writing and hope to see more from him. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he has something else coming out because of everything that's going on pertaining to his knowledge. So maybe we'll have another Radley or Alex Vitale book at some point. All right, another familiar author, and a book that, like, okay, let me just show you what it is first. So, Hocus Pocus by Kurt Vonnegut. And I'm bringing it up close to show you this cover because that's what connected me to this book. I'm always looking for Kurt Vonnegut books, but I want weird old covers. And so that had a hole in it. I just thought that was the neatest darn thing. And so, yeah, you can buy, like, all of Kurt Vonnegut's books are still in print. You could go buy, like, a nice, neat set of all the same ones with the same, like, line drawing on all the covers. Like, I don't want that. I want to find them over time. I want to find the weird ones. And so, like, this caught my eye off of that. Had zero idea what the story was about going in. Had I known, I would have read this book a long time ago. And it was super poignant for right now. I was literally between this and the next book that I was talking about. I was like, I need a little humor, a little relaxation here, just about the prison school pipeline instead. So I was not ready for that. But it was in the Vonnegut sense, in the classic, like, I don't know. His novels are non-linear, which can be challenging at first, but it also, I don't know. It's nice to just kind of sit in for a while and just, like, I don't know. It feels like hanging out in the shallow end a little bit. Like, I'm just waiting around. Like, I'm not accomplishing much, but, like, you are doing stuff. Like, there is a lot of, like, learning there, and he's so intelligent, but it's just sort of like in this fragmented way where sometimes I'll read things in his novel and be like, wait, did I miss something? Like, was I glazing a couple pages ago and did I just not register this? Like, that name doesn't ring a bell, or like, but you just realize, like a lot of his books, it's a person recanting their story and not in order. You know how a crazy person tells you stories. But yeah, so this book really, this came out in 1990, which would have been 6 years after his suicide attempt. And I really think that this was reflective of Ronald Reagan's impact. It seemed like Nixon just like any sane person, really fucked with Kurt's head. Is just to see all that happening, see everything, like everything he went through. Like we could recant his whole story, but like he's seen a ton in war times and peace. Like he's a very intelligent man, and so I think he understood the rhetoric in 1990 that was coming out, or that was a result of Ronald Reagan, and just seeing that, and I think he understood how damning that was for civil liberties and for black people especially too, because he really hits on that in this book, which is not something that, I mean, he's acknowledged like race in, or the disparities between the races, without having like, he doesn't have like a book on race per se. This is probably the most heavily like connected to race relations book of his that I've read, and it kind of starts. It's about this school that has like 300 students only each year, and then it gets converted into a prison which has a lot more people, and just the prisoners take over the prison, and it's just a wonder. Like if you've read a Vonnegut book, you probably are laughing at my attempt to explain a Vonnegut book right now. They are chaotic and beautiful and hilarious and insightful, and this was one of my favorites of his that I've ever read. And I've read more books from him than probably any other author. Honestly, him and Paulo Coelho are probably near each other, because Paulo Coelho's is like all novels, pretty much. A couple short story collections and poems, but like the Kurt Vonnegut, he has a lot of kind of odd ones too, or some things that were released like posthumously, or like compilations of interviews and stuff. But like material-wise, I honestly think I've probably read more Kurt Vonnegut than anything. And this was right around the time that I realized like some of my favorites of his were coming out. So it was Galapagos, then Bluebeard, then this, and then Timequake, his last novel. And I realized I liked the more depressed Vonnegut, which is insightful for my own self at this time. But yeah, this was an incredible book. If you have not read a Vonnegut novel, honestly, this is probably a fantastic one to start with. Obviously, Slaughterhouse-Five is a classic for a reason. It's beyond belief good, like, and has that same nonlinear style. So if you read that and you're like, that story was insane, I loved it, like, then you can handle his style, which I think there's sometimes people may not dig it, which the tip I have for Vonnegut books is kind of the tip I have for a lot, just reading in general, but like, you got to get a big chunk done initially. Like you can't go in like, I'm gonna read 20 pages and then I'll come back to it. Like, you're gonna not have any sense of how those 20 pages connect to anything else. Like, you have to start to get kind of a base in there, and that will allow you to kind of like hop back into the book and be like, oh yeah, I know what we're talking about here. It's not like a couple pages I'll get going, or like, I really think you got to get about 50 pages or so in there on that first read, and then you'll understand. But God, my love for him just deepens and deepens endlessly. Not as easy of a book to read. Black Skin, White Mask, Frantz, Fanon. If you could take the first half from this book and the second half from Wretched of the Earth, that book would be so good. That would be like the top book to be reading right now to understand colonization, to understand race relations beyond just like current, this week, this month, who said what, like big scheme, generational, international race relations. And so he gets really deep on some parts that make sense, and it was nice to be able to go down those rabbit holes with him. And then there are some other parts where combination of me not understanding the world as it was to him at that point, and then just sometimes his language, it's over my head sometimes. There's the first section of Wretched of the Earth. I was reading it, and I had texted my friend Charlie, who's far more intelligent than I am, and it was just like, yo, is it all like this? Like, he's like, it starts tough, and then it gets easier, and it really did. The first section I read that was like, oh, I understood this, was like, oh, okay, and I understand why these books are really damn important. And so there's a lot of that initially in this, and this isn't so much related to, like, this is pre-Algeria. So this is him in the psychology field experiencing racism. This was supposed to be a doctoral dissertation, and then it got denied. That kind of led him to publishing this with a bit of a slant on it for just like the racism that he experienced. And it's a dense book, I will say. Like it's there's a lot. There's very few people who I would recommend this to. That's not out of an intelligence thing. Like if you're only gonna read a book or two in a month, this probably isn't it. But if you see it on someone's shelf, like, hey, can I borrow that? Read the first couple sections, and then when it starts getting odd, just ditch it. You know, shitty as that is to say, like I like to read to fully learn from it, to not feel like I'm reading it to check a box, to say like, I read that book now, like straight up, like there's probably 50 pages in here that just did not make a lot of sense. Or just, I would need to go over them and really understand, or like kind of research at the same time, because some of it was a reaction to other writings of that era, or like, you know, lately this theory has been discussed a lot when we think about colonization and the mental health of someone who has been under that. And it's like, yeah, I didn't read that thing, so I don't quite know what you're saying in relation to that. But ultimately, Frantz Fanon is an incredible figure, and someone who, just like James Baldwin, his words 70 years later ring true, monumentally important, because he's not just getting into like what I see as like day-to-day politics. That's why I think like I see a lot of books out these days written about Trump and stuff, and written about the elections. Like that's only enjoyable like right now. Like so much of news and politics is like chatter about who said what this week, and it's just like fleeting stuff. This like colonization, that's a theme of humanity, and that's why his books are so timeless. Sometimes the language isn't, but ultimately, like 10 years from now, people are going to be reading it. Another 20 years, people are still going to be reading it. And there's probably tons of people who understand it more than me. I will definitely be rereading his books later in life. I know each time I come to them, I will be more intelligent, more ready to really grab on to what he had or what I missed in the past sections. So I don't throw it away. It's not a bad book by any means. I just wasn't fully ready for all of it. But between this and Wretched of the Earth, I would probably recommend this one over Wretched of the Earth. Just because really it was the last like 2 sections of Wretched of the Earth that like floored me. And then in this, the first couple sections were great. There was some pretty good, and then the last 1 or 2 were just like, I'm a dum-dum. I don't know what this is. So ultimately, really good book. I'm just not quite able to understand all of it. Last book of the month was when I saw Lit on Fire post a picture of. Instantly was just like, I've never seen it, never heard of it, I'm buying it soon. And Pushout, The Criminalization of Black Girls in Schools. This book was very insightful. It reminded me a lot of Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together at the Cafeteria by Beverly Daniel Tatum. But this was very much more kind of obviously on the feminine side of it, which makes sense, because when you look at all the categories, like between black and white, black have more difficulties. Women to men, more difficulties there. They get the worst of both worlds. And so a lot of it talked about things that, I don't know, I think we see or we are aware of but don't understand, or like from my white upbringing, I could assume that this is maybe why things are this way, but I'm not in it. I don't know. I've never been raised in that community, and so this was really insightful to see. Like, you know, they talk about like say black girl attitude, or there's some term that she had where she's like, picture it. It's like hand on the hip, neck kinked, like ready to speak, and it was just one of those. It's like I know what you're talking about, and she's, you know, it's really they're declaring their place in the world where everyone else casts them aside. Like, then that world isn't what you need to cater to. And these people aren't giving you the time of day, like, then I'm going to do my thing. And that, I totally understand that attitude. And so it's understandable that it's difficult for teachers, especially when they've had like all white kids who are just like super bland, not bland, but docile, I'll say, and then a more uproarious black girl, and combination of reasons they may not know how to handle that. But it really also got into just sort of how black girls develop a little bit faster than white girls in certain ways. Not just physically or like you would say like facially, of like potentially like looking older than they are more often than white people, which is something where then black girls aren't treated as childlike, that they're like, oh, I mean, you're already kind of tough, like, and that it just strips them of childhood. And so it really delves into some of the hardships that they face that are not exclusive to black people, but pretty consistent in that society versus like middle class white people. Like there's not a lot of like white girls. I won't say that. It discusses black girls who participate in sex work while they're in school. I can't remember statistics of who has most of what, but I want to say black girls were the most Hispanic than white. But it was just troubling to hear, I guess, how young that starts. For me to think that it extends earlier than high school was just like mind blowing. And it shouldn't be, but it is, and you know, it's my own naivete. I learned more about child trafficking through that, just in the sense of like what that can mean. I think sometimes when we first hear child trafficking, we think of like, I don't know, like the movie Taken comes to mind, or like international people going all over, but it really like simplified. It was like, children cannot be prostitutes. They are trafficked. Like they are told like, go work that corner, I'll buy you that, like that type of stuff, that's trafficking. And so, and maybe I'm the moron who didn't know all that, but like, I'm just telling you what I learned from it. But so it really just shows, it's like, yeah, if you are under the age of 18, the reason that it's illegal to have sex with someone who's over is because you're a minor and cognitively you're not understanding the ramifications of all of it. Now, I've met some very grown-up 18-year-olds. I've met some 19-year-olds that were dunces. So obviously that age isn't necessarily it. We all develop differently, but regardless of how tough any of the girls, they would say like, I'm learning business, you know, like I could just wait until after school and then start making money, but like, why don't I just do this while I do school? And it's like, I get it. I mean, I've hustled in other ways of my own too. Like I get going out and just getting some paper. Like no disrespect for that. Fuck the law. Do whatever you got to do. It's you know, shit's hard. But to hear like 11-year-old girls talk about it, that shit hit me in the face. Like, yeah, just to think of the guys that would like lure someone in for that. But yeah, it was a really insightful book, not just narrowing in on the sex work side of it. I think just that coupled with into policing put a lot of education into this month, which was nice because it's something we're hearing more and more about, or at least I am, and acknowledging it more. And it's important, and it shouldn't be criminalized. I see it as it's almost like the female counterpart to what drug dealing is for guys. And maybe this is a bold opinion, but I have no disrespect for drug dealers. Like, you're doing what you got to do. Like, we see weed is legal now because we understand it always should have been. So some people are just doing what they got to do, and realize that's a dicey topic. But yeah, this book really casts a light onto not only how people end up in that scenario, but then when they're in it, what do we do? Like, there's a quote in it that I'll just read back off of, just because I knew I couldn't memorize it. So, when we see girls in the sex trade or removed from schools or sent a signal that their presence in school is problematic, they're being handed over to the predators. Essentially, schools are throwing them away. And it really delved into this, of the sort of the different places you can go when you've been kicked out of school. Different sort of like juvenile, like detention centers, things, and a lot of it is like truancy is like a big thing that like becomes a criminal offense. And a lot of this is a result of having SROs inside schools that now, infractions that used to just be a principal saying like, hey, cut that out, where now it's like, okay, we're gonna write this up, this is on your criminal record now, and you're cultivating that school to prison pipeline. And so there's times where girls get wrapped up in that, but they're intelligent and they're realizing like, how do I get out of this? it's not easy. And so one of the big things that was addressed is like how credits transfer. So say you've been in high school 2.5 years, kicked out, you go to this juvenile detention center, you're in there for a couple of months, then you come back. How, like, what credits did I have? What can I do? And then do these credits, all of that is just such a mess. And it clearly is not built to help these girls rehabilitate their life. It's not structured in that way. It seems like it's structured for them to just be forgotten. That's what it seems like. And it's infuriating, but it's insightful. And a friend who teaches in Peoria reached out when I posted the books, like, I really want to read that. I hear horror stories around District 150. So it's not to say that this is just, that's an LA thing or something. Like, this is just in like the big cities, like all over. Like, and probably worse in rural communities. Imagine an area that hasn't had many black people before, and then a teacher's first time with a black girl, and she's a little rambunctious. Her first reaction isn't going to probably be like, her home situation may just be a whole other league. Like, you know, for generations, her people have been oppressed. You know, generational wealth hasn't been able to accumulate. You know, you go way back, we were just denying them education, and then it was separate but equal, but not so equal. Like, so we need to be giving black children a lot more slack in school, and it shouldn't just be punitive responses. It shouldn't be, they're causing a problem, get them out of the room so everyone else can have a good time. Like, no, it's what's the problem? Because then it's just going to be, all right, now they're out. Now we have this group of 22 instead of 23. Now who's the worst in there now? Now them out. And you're just going to keep taking kids out to make it better. But every kid you throw away is not a problem solved. And that's what the book really addresses. And so the term push-out was essentially like pushing them out of the education system or pushing them into the prison system. And it was an incredible book. She has a TED Talk that I just was looking last night. I was kind of doing my little research for this. I'd like to listen to, and she was very level-headed. She was really, really insightful on it. So I'm very thankful to have read all 6 of these books. Like, honestly, so I tried to pick like a favorite fiction and nonfiction. I guess there was only one fiction. So, and if I would have read 2 other fiction books, this probably would have been the best one anyways, because Kurt Vonnegut fucking rocks. So, Hocus Pocus, best fiction book of August? Well, yeah, time's weird these days. Of these books, best nonfiction? Yeah, I'm backwards. End of Policing, for sure. Just because it covered all the topics. So like when you hit all those things in the pie chart of places where we need help, and you look at what's left, then we can really talk about the policing issue with a lot more clarity. And so I think this is a book that should be read if anyone is confused. It's not to say I want you to read this so that you're on this side now. It's pretty objective. I think it really was a good look at things. But all these books helping to cultivate the brain I want to have and make me the person I want to be in 2020 and in life. And so I'm just so thankful for books. I could probably finish every episode with a little talk like this. Like I look at, say just 2020. Subtract any books read in that from my mind. Now, conversations come up, you're heated, things pop up, like, I just don't have the words. So, like, I feel like I'm just 1,000 times better in conversation because of these books. Not these ones specifically, but just anything that I'm reading pertinent to these topics. And it's not to say that I'm going to find the book that is, like, the correct, like, this is my philosophy, I just repeat this. Like, it's not about that. It's just that, so when it comes up, you can ad-lib a little sharper. And I do feel like these books really helped to hone in my perspective on life these days. So if you're having trouble communicating your feelings on some of these things, or finding yourself getting like riled up in conversation where you just want to blurt something out, like stack more information in your mind. And it's not to say you're going to read this and it's all going to stick, but like I said, you read one, another author is referenced, and you start to build these webs. You start to build these little mycelium networks in your brain. But yeah, also, if you ever have questions about books, or like, hey, this is something I want to learn about, I think you might have read it at some point, like, DM anytime. Let me know. Leave a comment. If you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe, do all that stuff. I'm new to YouTube. Really appreciate any support on this. And I've got some really good books lined up to read in September. So I'm really eager to dig into that and let y'all know how that goes. So thank you.